The year was 2247 when Commander Jack Morrison stood on the bridge of the colony ship Exodus and watched the final preparations for humanity's greatest journey. Earth was dying and everyone knew it. The great solar flare had stripped away much of the planet's magnetic field, and the radiation was getting worse every year. Scientists said they had maybe 50 years before the surface became completely uninhabitable. That wasn't enough time to save everyone, but it was enough time to save some 300 massive ships floated in orbit around Earth, and each one carried 50,000 people in cryogenic sleep. The plan was simple enough. They would travel to the Andromeda Relay, where dozens of habitable worlds waited for them. The journey would take 200 years, but nobody would feel it. They would go to sleep as refugees from a dying world and wake up as pioneers on a new one. Lieutenant Kate Sullivan ran her hand along the cryopod control panel and checked the readings for the 1000th time. Everything was perfect. The technology had been tested and retested. Every single system had backups, and those backups had backups. Nothing could go wrong because they had made absolutely sure of it. She looked at Jack and nodded. They were ready. Jack took one last look at Earth through the viewport. The planet looked sick from up here, with brown continents and gray oceans. He remembered when it used to be blue and green. He was only 30 years old, but he had seen his world die slowly. Now he would sleep through the centuries and wake up somewhere better. He hoped. The fleet began to move, and 300 ships carrying 15 million souls left Earth behind forever. They accelerated slowly at first, and then faster as they passed the Moon and Mars and Jupiter. By the time they reached the edge of the solar system, they were traveling at a significant fraction of light speed. The vastness of space opened up before them like an endless dark ocean. Jack climbed into his cryopod, and Kate sealed it from the outside. The last thing he saw was her face through the glass, and then the chemicals flooded his system and he went to sleep. Across the fleet, 15 million people closed their eyes at roughly the same time. The ships fell silent except for the hum of engines and the quiet whisper of eye systems maintaining course. Then something happened that nobody had predicted, because nobody could have predicted it. The fleet passed through a region of space where reality itself was thin. It was a spatial anomaly that didn't register on any sensor, because it existed in dimensions that humans hadn't even theorized yet. The anomaly wrapped around the fleet like a bubble, and time inside that bubble began to move differently than time outside. To the AI systems guiding the ships, nothing seemed wrong. They continued on course and monitored all systems, and everything appeared normal. But outside the bubble, the universe was aging rapidly. Stars were born and died. Civilizations rose and flourished and fell into dust. Empires conquered the galaxy and collapsed under their own weight. And through it all, the human fleet drifted on in their bubble of frozen time. Earth died completely about 800 years after the fleet left. The magnetic field failed entirely, and solar radiation scoured the surface clean of life. Another 1,000 years passed, and the ruins crumbled into dust. Alien explorers from the Valkyrie Empire found the dead planet 5,000 years after that. They studied the ruins and recovered some artifacts and learned about the species that had lived there. They called them humans and noted that they had apparently tried to flee their dying world. The Valkyrie assumed the humans had failed and gone extinct somewhere in deep space. The Valkyrie Empire was a coalition of 6 different alien species who had learned to work together out of necessity. The reptilian Valkyrie were the founders and the most numerous. The insectoid Threx provided technology. The aquatic Minder controlled trade routes. The silicon-based Korn mined asteroids and dead worlds. The telepathic Asari served as diplomats and mediators. The mammalian Druun supplied food and agriculture. Together they had built something stable and prosperous. They expanded slowly and carefully into the territory that humans had once explored. They found human outposts on distant moons and human probes drifting in the void. They collected these artifacts and put them in museums. They named the extinct species in their databases and moved on. The galaxy had seen countless civilizations rise and fall. Humanity was just one more 10,000 years passed outside the bubble. Inside the bubble, only moments ticked by. The AI systems noticed nothing wrong because from their perspective nothing was wrong. They maintained course and kept the cryopods running and waited patiently for the journey to end. Then the bubble collapsed. Nobody knew why. Perhaps the anomaly had a natural cycle. Perhaps the fleet finally passed out of its influence. Perhaps it was simply time. Whatever the reason, the bubble vanished in an instant, and suddenly the fleet was back in normal space and normal time. Alarms began to sound across 300 ships. The AI systems suddenly detected that their chronometers were wrong. Badly wrong? They began emergency wake-up procedures immediately. Something had gone terribly wrong with the mission, and the human crews needed to be awakened to deal with it. Captain Danny Hayes was the first to wake on the Exodus. His cryopod hissed open and he gasped for air as his lungs remembered how to work. His body felt weak and his mind was foggy, but training took over. He pulled himself out of the pod and staggered to the control panel. Red lights were flashing everywhere. Dr. Lisa Green's pod opened next and she fell out onto the floor coughing. She dragged herself upright and checked the medical monitors. Her eyes went wide when she saw the readings. She checked them again because they had to be wrong. They couldn't possibly be right. Danny made it to the main computer terminal and brought up the navigation display. His blood turned to ice. The star chart showed their position, but it was covered in markers and labels and navigation beacons that shouldn't exist. Someone had built things out here. Lots of things. Lisa appeared at his shoulder, and her face was pale. She opened her mouth to speak, and then closed it, and then opened it again. Finally, she managed to get the words out. "The chronometer says we have been asleep for 10,000 years. Danny stared at her. That was impossible. The journey was supposed to take 200 years. Something must have malfunctioned. He checked the system again, and then checked it a third time. Every single measurement confirmed it. 10,000 years had passed while they slept. The fleet had lost 10 millennia. Across the 300 ships, more people were waking up to the same impossible truth. They had left Earth in 2247. Now it was the year 12247, and everything they had known was gone. Admiral Craig Bennett woke up angry, and he didn't even know why yet. His cryopod opened with a hiss that sounded wrong somehow, and the lights in the medical bay were flashing red instead of the calm blue they should have been. Something had gone wrong with the mission, and every instinct he had developed over 40 years of military service was screaming at him to take command and fix it immediately. He was 63 years old when he went into the pod, and he was still 63 now, but he felt ancient as he pulled himself upright. His second-in-command, Colonel Paul Henderson, was already awake and helping other crew members out of their pods. Paul's face was grim, and that told Bennett everything he needed to know. This wasn't a minor malfunction. This was a disaster. The command crew of the flagship Valiant assembled in the briefing room within an hour. Everyone looked confused and worried, and Bennett didn't blame them. The AI system called Oracle had given them the basic facts, but those facts were so impossible that nobody wanted to believe them. 10,000 years. They had been asleep for 10,000 years while the universe moved on without them. Bennett stood at the head of the table and looked at his officers. These were good people who had volunteered to leave everything behind to give humanity a future. Now that future had become incredibly complicated. He took a breath and began speaking. "We need information before we do anything else, and we need it fast. Oracle has detected artificial structures throughout this region of space. Someone has colonized the territory we were supposed to claim. We need to know who they are and what they want and whether they are going to be a problem." Lieutenant Amy Brooks was the communications officer, and she was already working on scanning radio frequencies. She was 26 and brilliant, and she had left behind a family on Earth to join this mission. Now that family had been dead for 10,000 years. Bennett could see the grief in her eyes, but she pushed it aside and focused on her work. That was good. They all needed to focus. Captain Danny Hayes contacted Bennett from the Exodus and reported the same situation there. His chief engineer, Kate Sullivan, had confirmed that the temporal readings were accurate. They had indeed been caught in some kind of time displacement field. The good news was that the cryogenic systems had worked perfectly. Everyone who went into the pods had survived the journey. The bad news was that they had emerged into a galaxy they didn't recognize. Over the next 72 hours, the fleet remained on high alert while they gathered intelligence. They used passive sensors only because Bennett didn't want to reveal their presence yet. The human ships had stealth technology that was state-of-the-art when they left Earth, and apparently it was still good enough to hide them from whatever civilizations now occupied this space. What they learned was disturbing. The dominant power in this region was something called the Valkyrie Empire. It was a coalition of 6 alien species working together. Amy Brooks managed to intercept and translate their communications, and what she heard made her sick to her stomach. The aliens were talking about Earth, they were talking about humanity, they were talking about the extinct species that used to live on the 3rd planet of the Sol system. Bennett listened to the recordings in his private quarters. The alien voices were translated by the computer into flat, emotionless English, but the content was clear enough. Humanity was considered extinct. Earth was a dead world. The colony fleet had disappeared shortly after launch and was presumed lost. The Valkyrie had found human artifacts scattered across dozens of systems and had collected them from museums and private collections. That last part made Bennett's blood boil. These aliens were treating human history like archaeological curiosities. They were displaying human belongings in museums next to other extinct civilizations. They had written humanity off as just another failed species and moved on. He called another meeting of the senior staff. This time the mood was darker. Commander Ryan Foster had volunteered to take a stealth shuttle to investigate a nearby Valkyrie station up close. He was a career intelligence officer, and if anyone could sneak in and out undetected, it was him. Bennett approved the mission. Foster took Sergeant Nicole Perry with him because she was the best soldier in the fleet and because he trusted her completely. They launched from the Valiant in a small shuttle that was designed to be nearly invisible to sensors. The trip to the Valkyrie station took 8 hours. They spent that time studying everything they knew about Valkyrie technology and planning their infiltration. The station was called Heritage Station, and it was apparently a cultural center for the Empire. Foster and Perry docked at a maintenance port and used stolen access codes to get inside. They wore adaptive camouflage suits that bent light around them and made them effectively invisible as long as they moved slowly and carefully. What they found inside made them both furious. Heritage Station had an entire museum wing dedicated to extinct civilizations. There were displays about dozens of alien species that had risen and fallen over the millennia. Right there in the middle of it all was a section about humanity. Foster recorded everything with his suit camera. There were human flags behind glass, pieces of spacecraft hull, personal items that must have been recovered from abandoned outposts, photographs of Earth before it died, and plaques explaining how humanity had launched a desperate colony mission and then vanished during the Great Silence 200 years after their departure. Perry stood in front of a display case containing a child's toy from Earth and her hands clenched into fists. These aliens had stolen human belongings and put them on display like trophies. They had claimed human territory as their own. They had erased humanity from the galaxy except as a museum exhibit. Foster pulled her away before she could do something stupid like smash the case. They had what they came for. Now they needed to get out before someone noticed them. They made it back to the shuttle without incident and returned to the fleet. Bennett watched Foster's recording 3 times. Each time he watched it, his anger grew colder and harder. The Valkyrie hadn't attacked Earth, they hadn't hunted down the colony fleet, but they had taken everything humanity left behind and claimed it as their own. That was theft. That was desecration. That demanded a response. Dr. Lisa Green provided another piece of information that changed everything. She had been analyzing the technical data they had collected on Valkyrie ships and weapons and infrastructure. Her conclusion was startling. The Valkyrie were advanced, but they weren't that advanced. They had been at peace for most of their history. Their military technology had stagnated. Their ships were slower than human ships. Their weapons were less powerful. Their shields were weaker. Bennett understood what she was saying without her having to spell it out. The human fleet had been built during Earth's final desperate decades when humanity was facing extinction and pouring every resource into survival. These ships were designed by people who knew they might be the last humans who ever lived. They were over-engineered and overarmed and built to survive anything. And apparently 10,000 years of vulnerary progress still hadn't caught up to what desperate humans had created. Lieutenant Jake Morrison was the tactical officer on the Valiant, and he was the son of Jack Morrison, who had commanded the Exodus at the start of the journey. Jake had inherited his father's strategic mind, and right now he was calculating their odds. He looked at Bennett and said what everyone was thinking. We could take them in a fight. Ship for ship, we are superior. Even outnumbered, we could win battles. Bennett nodded slowly. That wasn't the question, though. The question was whether they should fight at all. Starting a war wasn't something to do lightly, even when you had good reasons and superior technology. He made his decision. We tried diplomacy first, and we do it by the book. We reveal ourselves and we negotiate for our rights. But we go in strong. And we make it clear that we are not begging for charity. We are demanding what is rightfully ours. Ambassador Ellen Price had been asleep for 10,000 years, and now she had to negotiate with aliens, who thought her entire species was extinct. She was 50 years old and had spent 30 years in diplomatic service before volunteering for the colony mission. She had negotiated treaties between nations and corporations and military alliances. But this was different. This was negotiating for the very existence of humanity as a galactic power. Admiral Bennett briefed her personally on everything they had learned. The Valkyrie Empire controlled thousands of systems, including dozens that had been marked for human colonization. They had built cities and industries and entire civilizations in territory that humanity had claimed first. They had taken human artifacts and put them in museums. And they thought they had every right to do so because as far as they were concerned, humanity had abandoned those claims 10,000 years ago. Ellen understood the problem immediately. From the Valkyrie perspective, they had done nothing wrong. They had found empty space and colonized it. They had found abandoned outposts and salvaged them. 10,000 years was longer than most civilizations lasted. No reasonable species would expect their claims to remain valid after that much time had passed. But humanity wasn't being reasonable right now. Humanity was angry. Bennett had awakened her specifically because he needed someone who could control that anger and channel it into productive negotiations. He also needed someone who could recognize when diplomacy had failed and it was time for other options. Ellen had that rare ability to be both idealistic and pragmatic. She would try her best to make peace, but she wouldn't sacrifice human dignity in the process. The delegation consisted of Ellen Bennett, Captain Danny Hayes, and Dr. Lisa Green. They took a diplomatic shuttle to Unity's Crown, which was the capital station of the Valkyrie Empire. The station was enormous and beautiful, with elegant architecture that blended styles from all 6 member species. Ellen noted that it was designed to intimidate visitors with its scale and grandeur. That told her something about Valkyrie psychology. They were met by Prelate Tharn, who was the current leader of the Valkyrie Council. He was a towering reptilian creature with golden scales and intelligent eyes that reminded Ellen of a crocodile. His counterpart was Counselor Zix of the Threx, who was an insectoid being with compound eyes and clicking mandibles. Both aliens seemed genuinely surprised to see humans. They had studied humanity as an extinct species, and now that extinct species was standing in front of them, demanding recognition. The negotiations began in a formal council chamber. Ellen had prepared her opening statement carefully. We are the survivors of Earth and the inheritors of all human claims and territories. We left our home system in the year 2247 by Earth standard dating. Due to circumstances beyond our control, we were displaced in time. We have now returned to claim what is rightfully ours. We seek recognition as a sovereign power and the return of all human territories and artifacts. Prelate Tharn listened carefully and then spoke through a translation device. This is remarkable and unexpected. We had no idea that any humans survived. However, you must understand that 10,000 years have passed. The territories you claim have been settled by our people for millennia. Millions of our citizens live on worlds you call yours. We cannot simply evacuate them because of ancient claims. Ellen kept her voice calm. Ancient to you perhaps, but not to us. We went to sleep yesterday by our perception. Those territories were designated for human colonization. That designation does not expire simply because time passed. Counselor Zix made a clicking sound that the translator rendered as skeptical amusement. Designated by whom and by what authority? You were a single species confined to one dying planet. You launched a desperate evacuation. That does not give you the right to claim thousands of light years of space and perpetuity. Captain Hayes leaned forward and his voice was hard. We marked those systems. We surveyed them. We sent probes and outposts. By any standard of galactic law, those are valid territorial claims. Zix clicked again. Were valid perhaps, but you abandoned them. Your civilization collapsed. Your species went extinct, or so we believed. Abandoned claims revert to whoever settles them next. That is also galactic law. The argument went in circles for hours. The Valkyrie position was clear. They acknowledged that humans had once claimed this territory, but those claims had expired through abandonment. They offered to give humanity a few systems on the outer edge of their space. Uninhabited systems. Resource-poor systems? Systems that nobody else wanted? They presented this as a generous offer. Ellen rejected it immediately. You are offering us scraps and expecting gratitude? That is unacceptable. We want our core territories returned. We want our artifacts returned. We want recognition as an equal power. Prelate Tharn's tone became harder. You are in no position to make demands. You have 300 ships and 15 million people. We have thousands of worlds and trillions of citizens. We are offering you a peaceful integration into our society. You would become the 7th member species of the Empire. You would have representation on the Council and protection under our laws. Bennett spoke for the first time and his voice was cold. You want us to be your subjects. You want humanity to bow to Valkyrie authority. That will never happen. Tharn spread his hands in a gesture that might have been conciliatory. We want you to be part of something greater than yourselves. The galaxy is a dangerous place. A small fleet of refugees cannot survive alone. We offer you safety and prosperity. That is more than generous considering your situation. The word refugees hit Ellen like a slap. That was how they saw humanity? Not as equals. Not as fellow explorers and pioneers. As refugees who should be grateful for whatever charity was offered. That single word told her everything she needed to know about how these negotiations would go. She stood up and Bennett and Hayes and Green stood with her. We thank you for your time, Prelate Tharn and Counselor Zix. We will consider your offer and respond shortly. But I will be clear. Humanity did not survive the death of Earth and 10,000 years of frozen time just to become subjects of another power. We are not refugees. We are the rightful claimants to this territory. We suggest you consider that carefully. They left the council chamber in cold silence. The shuttle ride back to the Valiant was even colder. Nobody spoke until they were safely aboard and in the briefing room with the door sealed. Then Bennett asked the question they were all thinking. Can we do this the hard way? Lisa Green had been running calculations the entire trip. She pulled up display screens showing fleet compositions and technological analyses. The Valkyrie have numbers, but we have quality. Ship for ship, we are superior in every category. Speed, weapons, shields, maneuverability. Our AI systems are more advanced. Our crews are better trained because we came from a world that was fighting for survival. They have been at peace for centuries. They are soft. Hayes added his own assessment. We cannot conquer their entire empire, but we do not need to. We just need to hit them hard enough and fast enough that they realize fighting us costs more than negotiating with us. We take back our core systems by force. We demonstrate our capabilities. Then we offer them peace on our terms. Ellen listened to the military officers plan a war, and part of her was horrified. She was a diplomat. She believed in peaceful solutions. But another part of her remembered the museum displays on Heritage Station. Human belongings behind glass. Human history reduced to a footnote. Human dignity dismissed as irrelevant. The Valkyrie had made it clear they would never respect humanity as equals, unless humanity forced them to. Bennett looked at her and waited for her opinion. She took a breath and made the hardest decision of her career. Diplomacy has failed, and I do not believe further negotiations will succeed. The Valkyrie see us as weak refugees with no rights. We must change that perception. I support military action, but with conditions. We give warnings before we attack. We allow civilians to evacuate. We target military and industrial facilities only. We do not become monsters just because we are fighting for our rights. Bennett nodded. Agreed, and we will make one thing clear to the Valkyrie. We are not conquerors. We just want what is ours. The Meridian system had been designated for human colonization in the original mission plans, and now it was home to 3 Valkyrie mining stations operated by the Corran, who were perfect for the job because their silicon-based biology let them survive in environments that would kill most organic species. The stations processed rare minerals from the asteroid belts and sent them back to the core worlds of the Empire. It was profitable and efficient, and the Corran had been doing it for 3,000 years. Commander Danny Hayes led 12 heavy cruisers into the system, and the Corran didn't even see them coming until it was too late. The human ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system and immediately began broadcasting on all frequencies. This is Commander Danny Hayes of the Human Fleet Exodus. This system was claimed by humanity in the year 2247 by Earth standard dating. Your presence here is illegal. You have 8 hours to evacuate all personnel. After that, we will dismantle your installations. This is your only warning. The Corran station managers must have thought it was some kind of joke at first. Humans were extinct. Everyone knew that. But their sensors were showing 12 unknown warships accelerating toward them, and those ships were not using any technology the Corran recognized. The station managers sent an emergency signal to the Valkyrie garrison and prepared to evacuate just in case this was real. The Valkyrie garrison consisted of 3 patrol ships that were designed for customs enforcement and piracy suppression. They were not designed for military combat against peer opponents. But the garrison commander was a proud officer who had orders to protect Valkyrie territory, and he decided that 3 patrol ships could handle whatever these mysterious intruders were. He formed his ships into attack formation and moved to intercept. Lieutenant Jake Morrison was handling tactical coordination on the Valiant, and he watched the Valkyrie ships approach with something like pity. The enemy vessels were slow, and their energy signatures showed weak shields and outdated weapons. This wasn't going to be a battle. It was going to be a demonstration. He targeted the lead ship with a railgun and fired a single shot. The projectile left the railgun at 0.03 times the speed of light. It crossed the distance to the Valkyrie ship in under a second. The Valkyrie shields tried to stop it and failed completely. The projectile punched through the shield like it wasn't there, and then through the armor plating, and then through the entire ship from bow to stern. The Valkyrie vessel broke in half and began tumbling through space-leaking atmosphere and debris. The other 2 Valkyrie ships immediately broke off their attack and retreated at maximum speed. Morrison let them go. The point had been made. 1 shot and 1 kill. The Valkyrie garrison commander sent a frantic message to his superiors explaining that humans were not extinct, and they had weapons that made Valkyrie military technology look like toys. The Corran evacuated their stations in 6 hours. They were not warriors, and they had no interest in dying for mining facilities that could be rebuilt elsewhere. Danny Hayes kept his word and waited until the last shuttle had cleared the system. Then he gave the order to fire. Human plasma cannons lit up the void with blue-white fire. The mining stations melted like ice under a blowtorch. It took less than 10 minutes to reduce 3,000 years of Corran industry to glowing slag. Hayes recorded the entire process and transmitted it to every Valkyrie communications hub within 50 light-years. This is what happens when you occupy human territory. Leave now or this happens to you, Admiral Bennett. watched the recording from the Valiant and allowed himself a small, cold smile. The Valkyrie were about to learn something important about humanity. Humans could be diplomatic and patient and peaceful, but humans could also be utterly ruthless when pushed too far. Earth had died fighting, and that fighting spirit had not disappeared during 10,000 years of frozen sleep. Over the next month, the human fleet struck 17 systems. Every single one had been marked for human colonization in the original mission database. Every single one was now occupied by Valkyrie citizens, and every single one was retaken by overwhelming force. The pattern was always the same. Human ships would arrive in system and broadcast a warning. Civilians were given 8 hours to evacuate. Military forces that tried to resist were destroyed quickly and efficiently. Once the system was clear, human forces would dismantle or destroy the Valkyrie installations. Then they would move to the next target. Captain Angela Ross commanded the battleship Defiant, and she led the assault on the Crimson Worlds. These were a cluster of 5 planets that the Valkyrie had terraformed over a period of 2,000 years. They were home to 17 million Valkyrie citizens. The evacuation took 3 weeks, but Ross waited patiently because Bennett's orders were clear. No civilian casualties. When the last transport ship had departed, Ross planted human territorial beacons on each world and moved on. The Valkyrie Empire watched in growing horror as this extinct species carved through their defenses like they were made of paper. Prelate Tharn called emergency sessions of the High Council. Military commanders who had never fought a real war in their entire careers suddenly had to figure out how to fight an enemy with superior technology and apparently no fear of casualties. Counselor Zix of the Threx analyzed the human attacks and came to a disturbing conclusion. The humans were not trying to conquer the Empire. They were not trying to destroy it. They were simply taking back what they considered theirs. Every system they attacked had been in the original human colonial database. Every attack was preceded by warnings and evacuation time. The humans were following rules of engagement even while demonstrating overwhelming force. That made them more dangerous, not less. It meant they were disciplined and controlled and fighting for a cause they believed in. The Valkyrie tried to organize a defense. They assembled their largest fleet at a location called Redemption Gate, which was a critical trade nexus connecting a dozen major systems. If the humans wanted to push deeper into Valkyrie territory, they would have to go through Redemption Gate. The Valkyrie brought nearly 1,000 ships to defend it. Surely numbers would count for something. Admiral Bennett brought the entire human fleet to meet them. 300 ships against 1,000. The odds looked terrible on paper. But Bennett had reviewed every engagement of the past month, and he knew something the Valkyrie didn't. Human ships could take punishment that would destroy Valkyrie vessels. Human weapons could penetrate Valkyrie shields with casual ease. And human crews had been trained by people who knew they might be the last hope for their species. The Battle of Redemption Gate lasted 4 hours. It was the largest space battle in Valkyrie history, and it was a disaster for them. The human fleet divided into 3 groups and attacked from different vectors. The Valkyrie formation broke under the coordinated assault. Ship after ship was disabled or destroyed. Human railguns fired continuously, and every shot seemed to find a target. Human plasma cannons melted through Valkyrie armor like butter. Angela Ross brought the Defiant into the heart of the enemy formation, and her ship took hits from a dozen different directions. The shields held. Human shields had been designed to withstand the radiation storms of a dying Earth, and Valkyrie weapons just weren't powerful enough to overwhelm them. She returned fire methodically, and 10 Valkyrie ships died in as many minutes. Jake Morrison coordinated the battle from the Valiant, and he felt sick to his stomach even as he called out targeting solutions. This wasn't war. This was slaughter. The Valkyrie were brave, and they kept fighting, but they had no chance. It was like watching ancient sailing ships try to fight a modern battleship. The outcome was never in doubt. After 3 hours, Prelate Tharn himself appeared on the communications channel. He was broadcasting from Unity's crown, and his voice was defeated. Enough, we surrender. Please stop the killing. Bennett gave the order to cease fire immediately. Human ships held their positions while Valkyrie vessels limped away from the battlefield. The butcher's bill was grim. 600 Valkyrie ships were disabled or destroyed. Thousands of Valkyrie personnel were dead. The human fleet had lost 3 ships and sustained moderate damage to another dozen. The strategic situation had changed completely in 4 hours. Bennett opened a channel to Tharn. We did not want this. We gave you the opportunity to negotiate fairly. You refused. You treated us as refugees with no rights. You forced this outcome. Tharn's voice was hollow. You have made your point. What are your terms for peace? Bennett had prepared this speech weeks ago. Humanity claims 100 systems that were designated for colonization in our original mission plans. 50 of those systems are currently occupied by Valkyrie citizens. You will relocate those citizens at your own expense within 1 standard year. All human artifacts currently in Valkyrie possession will be returned immediately. Humanity will be recognized as an independent sovereign power with full rights under galactic law. In exchange, we will join the Galactic Assembly and work with the Valkyrie Empire as equals, not subjects. There was a long silence. Then Tharn spoke. Your terms are accepted. Let us end this war before more lives are lost. The Treaty of New Beginnings was signed aboard the Valiant 6 weeks after the Battle of Redemption Gate, and the ceremony was broadcast across the entire galaxy. Prelate Tharn arrived with a full diplomatic delegation, and he looked like he had aged a decade in the past month. The proud reptilian who had dismissed humanity as refugees now treated Admiral Bennett with careful respect. Bordering on fear, Ellen Price had drafted the treaty herself, and she had made sure that every clause protected human interests without being needlessly punitive. She was still a diplomat at heart, and she believed that enemies today could become allies tomorrow if you gave them a path forward. The treaty gave humanity 100 star systems and recognized them as a sovereign power. It required the return of all human artifacts from museums and private collections. It established humanity as a founding member of what would become the new alliance. A restructured version of the Galactic Assembly with stronger protections for member rights. Most importantly, the treaty established that territorial claims did not simply expire because time passed. If a civilization made a valid claim and then disappeared for whatever reason, that claim remained valid if the civilization returned. This was now galactic law, and it would prevent other species from suffering the same injustice that humanity had faced. Tharn signed the treaty with what the translators called reluctant acceptance. His government had no choice, really. The alternative was watching the human fleet dismantle more Valkyrie infrastructure until the Empire's economy collapsed. Better to accept the loss of territory now than risk total defeat later. He looked at Bennett and spoke quietly. You could have destroyed us. Your technology is clearly superior. Why did you stop? Bennett considered the question carefully. Because we are not conquerors. We never were. We just wanted a home, and you tried to deny us that. Now we have it. The killing can stop, but Tharn pressed the point. Your people have suffered greatly. 10,000 years lost. Your homeworld dead. Your history almost erased. Do you not want revenge? Ellen answered before Bennett could. Revenge accomplishes nothing except creating new enemies. We want peace and prosperity for our people. We want to build a future that requires stable neighbors, not defeated enemies seeking revenge of their own. You will relocate your citizens from our claimed systems. We will compensate you fairly for the infrastructure you built there. In 10 years, perhaps we will be trading partners instead of former enemies. Counselor Zix of the Threx was also present, and his insectoid features were impossible to read, but his tone was thoughtful. You are either very wise or very naive. Time will tell which. But I will say this. The Threx did not believe humans could be as formidable as the old records suggested. We were wrong. Your species has our respect even if we do not entirely understand you. The formal ceremony concluded and the delegations separated. The Valkyrie would begin the massive task of relocating millions of their citizens from 50 occupied systems. Humanity would begin the equally massive task of building new colonies on worlds they had only surveyed from orbit 200 years ago. Well, 200 years ago for them. 10,000 years ago for the galaxy. Captain Danny Hayes stood in the observation deck of the Exodus and watched the Valkyrie ships depart. Lieutenant Kate Sullivan joined him, and they stood in comfortable silence for a while. Finally, Kate spoke. "Do you think we did the right thing? Starting a war, I mean?" Danny thought about the museum on Heritage Station. Human belongings behind glass. Human history treated as an extinct curiosity. Human dignity denied. He thought about Pralat Tharn's offer to make humanity a subject species. He thought about the alternative, which was accepting permanent second-class status in a galaxy that should have been theirs to explore. We gave them every chance to do the right thing, and they refused. They only respected us after we proved we could hurt them. I hate that. I wish diplomacy had worked. But I would rather be feared than forgotten. Our children will grow up on human worlds with human governments under human laws. That is worth fighting for. Kate nodded slowly. We lost 10,000 years. Everyone we knew is dead. Earth is dead. Sometimes I wake up and forget that for a moment. Then I remember, and it hits me all over again. Danny put his hand on her shoulder. We are all going through that. But we are alive and we have a future. A lot of species do not get second chances. We got one and we seized it. Now we build something worth remembering. Across the fleet, similar conversations were happening. 3 million people were processing the reality of their situation. They had left Earth as desperate refugees fleeing a dying world. They had arrived as conquerors taking back territory by force. Neither identity fit comfortably, but both were true. They would have to figure out who they wanted to be going forward. Admiral Bennett convened a meeting of all ship captains to discuss exactly that question. The military campaign was over, but the hard work of building a civilization was just beginning. They had 100 systems to colonize and only 3 million people to do it. That was a tiny population spread across such vast territory. They would need to grow quickly, and that meant encouraging large families and possibly accepting immigrants from other species. Captain Angela Ross raised an important point. We need to decide what kind of civilization we want to build. Do we remain isolated and focus on rebuilding human culture exactly as it was? Or do we integrate with the wider galaxy and become something new? Both paths have merit and both have risks. Colonel Paul Henderson argued for isolation, at least initially. We need to establish a strong foundation first. A distinct human identity and culture. Once we are secure, then we can consider opening up to others. If we integrate too quickly, we risk losing what makes us human, but Dr. Lisa Green disagreed. What makes us human is not genetic or cultural purity. It is our resilience and adaptability and refusal to give up. We survived Earth's death. We survived 10,000 years in frozen sleep. We survived waking up in a hostile galaxy. We will survive whatever comes next. But we do not need to do it alone. The Valkyrie were wrong to deny us, but that does not mean all aliens are our enemies. Bennett listened to both sides and made his decision. We will colonize our 100 systems and establish strong human governments there. That is non-negotiable. But we will also engage with the wider galaxy. We will trade and form alliances, and yes, we will accept immigrants who wish to live under human law. We will be distinctly human, but not exclusively human. Our civilization will be a beacon for anyone who values freedom and dignity, and the right to determine their own future. The vote was not unanimous, but it passed with strong support. Humanity would be open but cautious, welcoming but not naive, strong enough to defend itself but willing to make friends. Over the next year, the colonization effort began in earnest. Each of the 100 systems received at least one colony ship and thousands of people. They landed on worlds that the original mission planners had identified as suitable, and they began building cities and farms and industries. It was hard work made harder by the fact that they were starting with limited resources and no support from Earth, because Earth no longer existed, but they had one advantage that no other colonial effort in human history had ever possessed. They had absolute unity of purpose. Every single person in the fleet had volunteered to leave everything behind to give humanity a future. That level of commitment was rare and precious. They worked 18-hour days, and they did it willingly because they understood what was at stake. Jake Morrison took command of a colony on a world they named New Terra. It was a beautiful planet with blue oceans and green continents, and it reminded everyone of what Earth had been before it died. Jake stood on a hill overlooking the first settlement and watched construction robots assemble prefabricated buildings. In a few months there would be farms and factories. In a few years there would be cities. In a generation there would be millions of people who had never known old Earth but would carry its legacy forward. Amy Brooks set up the first interstellar communications network connecting the 100 human systems. She made sure that every colony could talk to every other colony instantly through quantum entanglement communicators. This was crucial because scattered across such vast distances they could easily drift apart. The network would keep them united. Ellen Price became humanity's first ambassador to the Galactic Assembly. She worked tirelessly to build relationships with other species and repair the damage done during the war. The Valkyrie would never be close friends, but they could be cordial neighbors. Other species watched humanity with interest and some with concern. This new power had appeared suddenly and defeated the Valkyrie Empire in open warfare. That made humanity dangerous but also potentially valuable as an ally. 5 years after the treaty was signed, Admiral Bennett retired from military service. He was 68 years old physically, but he had lived through experiences that aged him far beyond that. He chose to settle on New Terra and spent his remaining years writing a comprehensive history of the fleet's journey. He wanted future generations to understand what their ancestors had sacrificed and achieved. He died peacefully at age 73, surrounded by friends and colleagues. His funeral was attended by 10,000 people, including Prelate Tarn, who had become an unlikely friend in the Yay.